Okay, so welcome everyone to day 2 of the Nature Play Conference. We're going to start with, first, Julie is going to say a karakia for us to open our evening. So over to you, Julie.
Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Ke tawa ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora ki te katoa. Haumie, huie, taiki.
Kia ora. And I'm just, because Julie was very kind to send that through beforehand, I've just put that into the chat so you can see the translation for the karakia that Julie just said. So thank you, Julie. Hey, so just a quick, I wanted to just do a very short reflection on day 1 because we have Joseph Hullen yesterday and he was talking about the meaning of taio. We had a bit of a kōrero afterwards, a chat afterwards, and that was really good. There was a lot of messages coming through just saying how valuable that was, having breakout rooms and to connect with people in an environment like this. So yeah, really appreciated all the feedback last night, but also I've had a few emails and messages today just saying that, someone said it was enlightening, that they just got so much out of it, and it was just amazing connecting with other people who are doing similar things or wanting to do these things. So thanks everyone who came, and to those of you who have watched it today, which I put the link into the website page for those who are registered for the conference. Right, I think that's about it, but now let's get into tonight. So tonight we are really stoked to have Julie Frew, who is here tonight talking about all behaviour is communication and what's beneath behaviour and how we can effectively support children. So Julie is a registered occupational therapist with over 14 years of experience, specialised experience alongside children and their families, and she has completed a postgraduate study using sensory processing principles, which I find really interesting. And I think a lot of that knowledge is going to come through in our kōrero today. So Julie draws heavily on the restorative power of music and the deep connection to the natural world through her work. So that's really exciting for me. I also, from a personal side, I got to meet Julie a couple of years ago at a conference that a friend was running, and that she was co-running as well. And from there, I found out that our children go to the same kindergarten and school. So we have a few chats outside the school from time to time as well. So I feel quite lucky for that. But yeah, thanks so much, Julie, for joining us today. I'm really excited about hearing from you today, mainly because I have children and this relates a lot to them. And I think, even though this is a nature play conference, this is just, everyone has behaviors, and yeah, I think it's really important that we can understand what's happening, what's going on behind those behaviors for everyone, for every situation. So this is not just specific to nature, but I know that through our conversations, you've talked about, linking to that natural world as well for us today. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand over to you. And just remind people, because we're all on Zoom now, you can use the chat function. If you have any questions through, please ask them through, and I will just draw Julie's attention to those. But we'll also have an opportunity for some Q&A at the end as well. Ka pai. Over to you, Julie.
Tēnā koutou, he uri āhua no tāwhiti, e tau mai o kui tūpuna ki o tau tahi Aotearoa, a ka mahia hau ki tau whenua, ka mahia au ki te whenua me ona uri. E tipu ake o hau ki te maunga o Tanikwa, me te taha o te muriwai o Naisna. Ka mihi au ki te iwi o tēnei rohe ko nei tahu, ko Julia hau. Ko tēnei te mihi kia koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So thanks all for joining us here instead of Facebook. Well, you might have some good reflections, probably definitely Celia will, on her nervous system state when that happened to her as we talk through tonight. So I am an occupational therapist. I work with very little children at the moment. I used to run my own private practice for a while before I had my own tamariki, and now I work 2 days a week in early intervention, specifically in a program called Relating and Communicating. And a huge part of my role is tracking arousal and energy in children and in myself, and matching and leading that arousal and energy to form a base of physiological regulation in the child within the context of relationship. So that's my big passion, and that's kind of the lens that I want to bring, and hopefully hopefully give you some things to take away with you to think more about and practice in the work that you do. So I just wanted to start by kind of defining what I mean when I say all behaviour is communication. So for me, this is first and foremost about being curious. And in my practice, I've learned that behaviour is an indicator or a signpost, and it's what's observable to us, but it can tell us a bit about what's going on for a person or what might be going on for a person. And the more open we are to what's going on or what might be going on, the less that we treat behaviour or try and get rid of behaviour, and we allow ourselves to shift from seeing children or anyone for that matter as manipulative or defiant or oppositional or difficult, and we start to see that there is this signpost or this clue, and there's more going on here than what we can see on the surface. So beneath behaviour, we might find many different things. We might find that a person's nervous system state has shifted into a mode where they're prioritising protection over connection. We might find that they are over-responsive to a particular sensory input. So maybe being bumped into is just too much for somebody's touch system, or maybe they're missing a particular sensory input. So maybe they missed part of your auditory instruction because they were listening to the wind or the water nearby, or maybe their overall system was too under-aroused or too over-aroused to regulate their attention to your voice. Or maybe we find that a child doesn't have the skills developmentally yet to do what others are doing, and they're finding that frustrating or disconnecting. Or maybe they don't know how to plan an action or coordinate a motor plan, and they need more scaffolding than other children who seem to be around that same age. And maybe they don't know how to join a game that others have started, and so they interrupt it or they run off with things that others are playing with. There's just so many possible reasons for why people do what they do, especially children. And I'm definitely not here to give you all the answers. That would be impossible for starters, and it would take me days. But also, the moment that I believe that I have all the answers is the moment that I lose my curiosity. And if there's one thing that I would love for you to take away, it's that being curious is the key. And curiosity is something that most children are really good at. And it's one of those things I think we kind of get schooled out of to our detriment. And it's one of the things that I really love about taking children outside and about being in nature and about play. And I'm guessing that you probably feel the same, that the natural world is so full of mystery and full of wonder. We find things out all the time. I was reflecting on what Joseph was talking about last night with creation stories, and I still am just blown away by the thought that the elements that exist on our planet, that things are made of, we're also made of those same elements. That still blows my mind. And I thought it was really wonderful to think about those creation stories, where even in those stories and those creation poems that he referred to, people are talked about being made from dust. And then we look at the lens of science, and again it says in Carl Sagan, the astrophysicist's beautiful words, that we're all made of star stuff. So I love finding out these interconnections and that beauty and wonder and mystery that's in the natural world. Nature it invites our curiosity. So let's keep that alive. And I think most importantly, flexing this muscle of curiosity is what welcomes compassion. So I actually just want to start with a little exercise, and this was taught to me by someone called David Trelevin, who is a trauma-sensitive mindfulness teacher. And so he first led me through this practice. And when I did it, I was reflecting on how applicable it was to my work with children and even as a mum. So I want to invite you to try it with me now. So all you need are your two hands. And the invitation here is to just ball one hand up into a fist. And I want you to imagine that in staying closed, this hand is taking care of your safety, right? And staying closed, this hand's taking care of your safety. And now using your other hand, I invite you to see what it's like to try and open that fist. And notice as you do this what it feels like. What happens to your fist? What thoughts and feelings are present? What does the rest of your body do? Your shoulders, your jaw, your breathing? And then just shaking out your hands. And in the second part, we're going to take our hands again and make a fist again with your one hand. And again, imagine that this is taking care of your safety. And staying closed, it's taking care of your safety. And this time, taking your other hand and just placing it gently underneath. And imagine it's like you're saying to that fist, of course you're closed. You're taking care of safety. That's a smart thing to do. I'm here with you. And notice again what that feels like. What thoughts or feelings do you experience? What does it feel like in your body? Your face, your heart rate, your breathing. Notice what happens to your fist. And seeing even if you can let that hand help the fist stay closed just a little, just gently supporting, like it's saying, here, I'll help you. And just resting your hands back down again. So I'd love to know how you found that. If you are comfortable sharing in the chat box, you can share anything that came to mind. What was the difference with the first and second part for you? What things did you notice in your body the first and second time? Was it different? Or was it exactly the same? Holding feels calming and relaxed. Yeah. I don't know if everyone else is following the chat, but people are generally saying that the first part was pretty stressful and that there was tension in their bodies, in their jaw, clenching teeth. But when the fist was just being held, that people relaxed, their bodies were softer. Yeah, and people felt more calm. Yeah, it's pretty powerful exercise, isn't it? So the first consideration when it comes to thinking about behaviour, and especially complex behaviour, is to think about safety. And I know that you'll have probably all worked really hard on your safety plans and your risk management when you're taking children outside, but I am wanting us to think for a minute about relational safety and physiological safety. So that's the sense of safety in my body. An embodied sense of safety, which is a subjective experience that's sometimes called felt safety. And that, what I mean by subjective is, you could have taken care of all of the physical elements of a task, and a child might still perceive that they aren't safe. And we can't logically force a sense of felt safety on somebody. It has to be an embodied sense. And let's think for a minute then that play doesn't happen when we don't feel safe. I don't know if you've heard of Jaak Panskep's work, but he talks about play circuitry emerging when we feel safe. And play allows connection to unfold, but only once that balance of safety is established. In polyvagal theory, play is talked about as a blended state, right? So we have these different states that our nervous system moves into. We are in safe and social when we're connected and engaging with others, but we can shift into our fight or flight system or our sympathetic nervous system, and we can also shift into our kind of shutdown or dissociative system. And those two are more protective or defensive systems. But play, interestingly enough, is a blended state. So it's where we're grounded and safe and social, but we've got this edge of sympathetic energy, right? Deb Dana talks about how we dip a toe into sympathetic, or that sympathetic nervous system. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that system actually is soon and how it's balanced by the parasympathetic. But for now, I just want that to sink in, that play is when we're grounded and safe and social, but with this edge of mobilizing energy. And I wonder how many situations you can think of where the balance tipped and things went from rough and tumble into full-on sympathetic energy. So at its fullest activation, that's essentially our fight or flight energy. And play is so wonderful for learning about that edge. When things tip, and how do we find our way back home again into that safer social mode, or being anchored in safe and social? So in my work, this is a really delicate balance, and I work with children who can find it really hard to access that rhythm of relationship for many different reasons. And we're always balancing, exploring physiological regulation for this child in this moment inside the context of their primary relationship with their primary attachment figure. And I watch playfulness time and time again emerge from that base of safety inside their primary relationship. From first feeling safe, and then the intertwining of being connected and being regulated inside of relationship. So I also want to ask you now, do you consider yourself a part of nature? So I talked before about being made of star stuff, or any of those stories that allow us to consider how we got here and where we came from. And do we consider ourselves separate to the natural world or part of the natural world? And for me, this is so huge when it comes to our children and what I want to teach my children. And I think that a lot of destruction has come from feeling like we're not part of the natural world. And when we view ourselves as connected to and part of this interconnected web of life, that we actually take better care of the world around us. And so that's where I want to start with you and with me as part of nature. So Deb Dana, who I mentioned before, who teaches on polyvagal theory, she talks about how our nervous systems are in this process of neuroception. And that process is about listening to cues from inside us from outside us and between our nervous system and the nervous system of another. So we are going to talk a little bit about the inside and outside parts soon, but I just want to hang out here in this between business of us as nature. And let's think for a minute how we might bring curiosity to ourselves. So again, I'm just going to invite you into another little practice. And you might find it easier to lower your eyes or close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. And just bring your mind to a particular child. So just bringing that picture of that child into your mind. And perhaps a particular situation that was challenging for you in that child. Might be your own child or a child you're working with. Could be a relative. And if you can't think of a child, you can picture a co-worker or a family member. Just someone, a situation where someone's behaviour was hard for you to understand or to accept. And first just seeing if you notice with this situation in your mind, any thoughts that arise. And seeing if maybe you can name some of them, simply as judging, analysing, worrying, just what kind of thoughts are in your mind. And noticing with this scenario, any feelings that arise for you. Maybe frustration, or vulnerability, or anger, fear, shame. And noticing sensations, where it lands in your body. Maybe in your heart space, your chest, or your jaw tightening, or your stomach. And now, without trying to get rid of any of those thoughts or feelings or sensations, just inviting, if it's right for you, your breath. Or if it's more comfortable, you can try a soothing touch like a hand on your heart, or one on your heart and one on your stomach. And breathing in into those thoughts and feelings and sensations in your body. And then just gently opening your eyes when you're ready. So relational neuroscience tells us that we'll lead with our social engagement system first. But if we don't feel safe, we'll start to react with these protective and defensive strategies. And we experience disconnection, or the sense of non-belonging, of being separate, as a threat. So our brains are social organs. And Dr. Stephen Porges, who authored the polyvagal theory that I have mentioned a few times now, says that connection is a biological imperative. It's a threat to our safety to be disconnected and out of relationship. We need connection to ourselves, connection to others, and connection to the natural world. And we're slowly learning this reality that sensation and emotion are coded together. And this is not just true for children in our care or that we're working with, or our own children. It's true for all of us, that sensation and emotion are dual coded. And that means when you feel frustrated or worried, sensation travels up from your body to your brain, and information travels from your brain back down to your body. And this can happen without our conscious awareness. We can learn to be conscious of aspects of it. We can notice sensations. We can notice feelings and thoughts. We can notice the impact of us getting stuck in a story and how we hold that in our own body. And when we're thinking about making ourselves safe, we want to communicate with our body that we are safe. And that starts with our awareness. What's going on in me? What's my body doing? What's my face doing? What are my eyes doing? What is my voice doing? All of these things bring cues of safety or danger to the child's nervous system. And the more primed that their nervous system is for threat and danger, the more likely it is that they will tune in to all of these non-verbal cues more vigilantly. So in my work, I video a lot of my sessions. And one thing I noticed when I was watching back a video of myself was that when I was trying to convey empathy, I often frowned. You can't see my eyebrows very well now because my fringe is getting long. I often frowned like, oh. And because I work with children who are non-speaking, I was reflecting on what might it be like if they focused on only one tiny piece of my face and it happened to be my eyebrows and they were frowning. Would that be conveying empathy? Or could that be misinterpreted? Could it be a miscue that I was actually angry at them? And so I spent a lot of time seeing if I could actually soften and open up my eyes and my eyebrows when I was trying to convey an empathetic kind of concern for a child. So just picking one teeny tiny little thing of what may or may not be a cue of safety or danger. So we know things like an asymmetrical posture or a tilted head and a resonant voice are things that give these cues of safety. So when we stand in complete symmetry, or we keep our head really still when we're talking, or our voice becomes really, really tight, all of those things can come across as confrontational or cues of danger. I don't know if you've ever tried to sing at a funeral, but I have a few times, and it really hasn't gone well because all of that distress tightens my vocal cords and I just cannot get any resonance in my voice. And so that's what happens when we feel this heightened arousal or heightened emotion, that actually our whole body gets tight and our voice gets tight, and people pick up on those little cues. So that's probably quite a lot of information, and I'm not suggesting that you need to change everything all at once, but maybe just choosing one thing, like me and my eyebrows, and start noticing one thing about your body or your voice or your face that adds a cue of safety for a child, and keep doing it. And maybe when you're thinking about your reflective practice or your peer supervision or your personal inner work, jotting down some things that you might want to explore over time, like, what is my adult attachment style? What stories about behavior do I carry around with me that are relics of how I was raised or how someone treated me? What are my sensory preferences? What activates my nervous system? What soothes and nourishes my nervous system? This is years of exploring, by the way, but being curious about our own behavior can very often shift how we go about decoding children and other people's behavior. So the writer Anais Nin said, we don't see things as we are. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. So we started with thinking about this between my nervous system and another nervous system. Let's think a little bit about inside, and we'll briefly touch on outside. But we'll go deeper into both of those in the workshop if you do want to explore that more. So just thinking about regulation. So this is a word that gets used a lot nowadays, I find. I don't know about you. Maybe the term self-regulation especially. And I just want to think about self-regulation as a neurological phenomenon, not just a behavioural phenomenon. So when I talked about play earlier, I talked about finding these edges and moving between nervous system states. And that is what self-regulation is all about. It's a learned skill over many, many years, and learned through repeated experiences of co-regulation, which is why we started with the between part. So we're talking about what I would call a window of tolerance here. And then that's the edge of my capacity to stay regulated. When I'm outside of that, I experience dysregulation. And when I'm in a state of readiness, not necessarily calm, a state of readiness, that's my optimal zone for learning. And that is all about balance. So Bruce Perry, who's one of my most favorite authors and teachers and neuroscientists, says that regulation is about being in balance. Stress is what occurs when a demand or a challenge takes us out of balance, away from our regulated set points. That's our window of tolerance. And he goes on to say, balance is the core of health. We feel and function best when our body's systems are in balance and when we're in balance with friends, family, community, and nature. It's pretty wise. So I want to think about that a little bit deeper. I talked about our sympathetic nervous system, right? So within our autonomic nervous system, that's the nervous system that's ticking along automatically in the background, we have these two branches, sympathetic and parasympathetic, and they balance each other out. The most common analogy is accelerator and brakes. So the parasympathetic is like the brakes and the sympathetic is like the accelerator. You might also think of the autonomic nervous system as a house. The sympathetic is your alarm system, and the parasympathetic are the utilities. This is Deb Dana's analogy. And they tick along both the alarm system and the utilities in the background. And when we need them, they're very useful. But when they're just sitting there in the background, we can really inhabit our house with ease. But if we go back to the accelerator and brake, this is what we're developing as babies, and I'd say many adults still do, that when a baby's stress response system is activated, maybe the baby's hungry or it's cold or it needs its nappy changed, the carer comes and soothes the baby by feeding it or wrapping it or changing its nappy, and this brings the baby back into balance. And over time, this repeats and becomes a resilience building pattern. And this lays the foundation for their attachment and for regulation. The baby mobilizes, right? It's that mobilizing energy. It cries, it kicks its limbs around, uses that mobilizing energy in its attachment relationship, and then it's soothed, right? It presses on the accelerator, and then the carer comes and helps to press on the brakes. The baby experiences a little bit of stress, and then it experiences relief and reward. And as a child grows this in a secure attachment, the carer is both that safe base that the child can move away from and explore, and it is the safe haven for the child to be welcomed back and to be supported to organize their feelings. So this is regulation developing inside repeated co-regulatory experiences. And that's what shapes this window of tolerance. And to a degree, how wide or narrow those edges are. And sensory processing differences can also contribute to these thresholds. And that, again, we talk about in the workshop a little bit more. If we think of behavior then as an adaptation, right? If the child receive this threat from inside their body or outside their body or between their system and another person's system, this starts a shift in their state. And because we're social creatures, we might first look to others, it's called flocking, to place the threat and work out, is this dangerous? And if nobody's near or their cues that they are picking up confirm that there's a threat, then they might start scanning the environment. And that's when you might see freeze. And that's often what we do when we're trying to locate a threat or we're trying to be invisible. And then you might shift into fight or flee. That's moving up the arousal continuum. And as they go, their system is adapting to cope with what they're perceiving as a threat and working out, how can I best survive this? And in sympathetic arousal, the body's mobilized or filled with this mobilizing energy, and that is ultimately what allows it to fight or flee. And then we have another continuum, the dissociative continuum, and that can be less noticeable or less of a behavioral challenge, because it's more about what we might see on the outside is somebody who's overly compliant or maybe spaced out a little bit. And if sympathetic is all about mobilizing energy, dissociation is about immobilizing. And in that state, instead of pumping blood out to the limbs, it keeps it in the trunk. Instead of the heart rate increasing, it decreases. Instead of adrenaline being released, our body's painkillers are released, like endorphins. And essentially, that's the response that we would use if we can't get away from a threat. And its design is to keep us safe and alive and ready us really for injury or pain. So on the other end of that continuum, the utilities of our house, the state is actually about rest and replenishment. So remember, this is our brake system. Even as I'm talking now, you'll be dissociating for moments to allow yourself to actually process all the things that I'm saying. It's very natural. But this helps us to see that behavior as an adaptation. We don't have to feel a need to avoid any of those states. We just want to notice, how's this state matched to what's going on? And is this adaptation helpful for me right now? And then we can support the child's sense of safety and connection and develop their regulatory capacity. So find their way back home so they can inhabit their house or their body. And as I'm sure you know, as the perception of threat increases, our access to these higher level systems decreases. And Bruce Perry talks about this as state-dependent functioning. So as threat increases and the lower areas of the brain are in control, the functions that those areas mediate become most apparent. And as the function of the higher level aspects of the brain are in control of, those are hard to access, or if not impossible in that moment. So if you think about the function of reflection, that's mediated by a prefrontal cortex area. And we can't expect a child who's in this heightened state of arousal or distress to access their reflective capacities. I'm sure this is stuff that you know very well. But it's where it becomes helpful to be curious about, how do I track arousal and energy rather than just seeing behavior on the surface? What are the cues that lead up to these edges in the children that I'm working with? And what does arousal look like as it escalates for this child? So maybe taking a minute and giving some feedback to each other in the chat about how you would notice these shifts in energy and arousal in a child that you're working with. What might you notice about their body, right? What might you notice about a child's eyes, or their movement, their pacing, their voice? Feel free to pop some things up. Tense muscles. Yeah, absolutely. So you might see a child move from being in this kind of floppy flexion into extension, right? Tensing muscles. Absolutely. Their eyes flit around and they frown. Yeah, definitely. Right, so often we, trying to keep track of all these, my eyes. When we're more vigilant, right, our eyes can't focus necessarily on one thing. Their voice becomes louder, or they start talking more and more and more, less capacity to listen. Walking on toes, yes, I see that with excitement as well. So heightened arousal, excitement, or maybe feeling anxious. Loss of eye contact. Yeah, again, it's a lot to take in looking at a human face. So sometimes it can be easier to move away from that if we're in a state of vigilance. Aggression, yeah, again, that's that fight energy. Fight energy. I'm reading fidgety at the same time, sorry. Looking angry. Yeah, tell me more about what is looking angry. How do you notice that in somebody's body? What are the precursors in a body to full on aggression and anger? Moving faster, zooming around. Yep. Clenching their fists. Yes, there's a lot of tightening happening, isn't there? Eyes maybe become wider, looking around. They lose the capacity to modulate, so can't pace their movement or their voice. Great. Thanks for that. So I want to talk a little bit about, I'm just watching the time as well. Hopefully I'm not going on for too long, am I? Okay. I'll talk more about sensory processing a bit more in depth in the workshop, but I wanted to, as we come to a finish, just explore with you a way to start thinking about this, or to bring that curiosity about how it might play into a child's reactions and behaviour, and what kind of playful invitations you can proactively provide and use to track arousal. Like, what happens for this child during this particular activity, and what are some possible reasons for why. So we want to add cues of safety, and I will be looking in my work for what I would call a glimmer. So when you notice a few seconds of that sense of ease, then that's probably, there's a cue of safety there, and how can we lean into that glimmer, and also how can we reduce cues of danger from inside, outside, in between. So I just want to take a minute to think about rhythmic activity. Right? Rhythm is a very powerful regulator. Again, Bruce Perry talks a lot about rhythmic somatosensory input. Somatosensory, just soma is the body, so somatosensory input is talking about our body senses, movement, touch, balance, and how do we bring rhythm to that, or how do we notice rhythm, and what is a glimmer, or what's soothing and bringing ease. So again, maybe popping in the chat box, thinking about just you, what rhythmic activities in your day do you find soothing and nourishing? Knitting, beautiful, that's perfect. Very rhythmic. Walking, yeah, slow walking. Any other ideas? Swings. Rubbing hands with cream. Oh, I have never heard of that one before, but totally. Music, yeah, listening to music, dancing, colouring. That's a great one, very creative. Walking on grass. Watching the river or the ocean. Beautiful. For me, this is such a big one in connecting back to the natural world and what it teaches us, and invites us to explore about what is regulating and soothing. Again, Bruce Perry says that the rhythms of the natural world are embedded in our biological systems. I think that's so beautiful. So rhythm is inside us, from our heartbeat, our breathing, our sleep-wake cycles. It's outside us in the seasons, in the way that trees and plants change, the moon, the ocean, and it's between us in our relationships, our back and forth interactions, our conversations, our turn taking, all come back to rhythm, right? When a conversation doesn't flow and doesn't have rhythm, it's uncomfortable, isn't it? We want rhythm in our relationships. We want reciprocity in our relationships. And all of those aspects of rhythm are made possible through our sensory systems. So our interoception, or our internal sense of our organs or viscera, is the seat of sensing our emotions. We can sense our heartbeat and our breathing rhythm, our hunger, our thirst, because of our interoception. The soothing nature of deep touch, right? So that's pressure to that skin that we learn in our earliest relationships. That's soothing, because I know I end here and you begin through this boundary of my skin. And the grounding that comes from rhythmic movement and movement against resistance, like people talked about walking uphill for that extra resistance, running, swinging back and forth, climbing trees, pushing and pulling movements like raking, digging, tug of wars, rope games. These all engage our movement and balance systems, often through very rhythmic activity, and we find regulation. And those are what I would call our inner senses that give us information about ourselves and our own boundary and where we are in relation to things and the earth and other people. And our ability to notice then what's around us, like the changes in season or the roll of the waves or the movement and stillness within nature, that's possible because our eyes and our ears bring us this information from the world around us. Noticing patterns in nature like fractals, these are rhythmic in their essence. They're repeated, they're symmetrical, and they're soothing for us as humans. They tap into that parasympathetic energy. So rhythm comes from the Greek word rhythmos, which means any regular, recurring motion or symmetry, or to flow. And all of these allow us to move back and forth in relationship. We talk, we listen, we gesture, we observe. We reach out with a part of ourselves and we're met by the other. And you can see this also in deep play, this kind of rhythmicity unfolds, doesn't it? There's a flow to it. And I think it's beautiful because it connects these lowest parts of the brain and the highest parts of our brain. Play is integrating. And we'll talk a little bit more in the workshop about neurological thresholds and behaviour continuums. But the most important thing when it comes to sensory processing is to look for what is integrating. So what's organising brings a sense of flow and rhythmicity and a sense of ease in the body. Notice these little glimmers and start writing them down. Is there rhythmicity and regularity for this child? That's where you want to start. I'm just going to finish with a poem, and then if anyone's got any questions, you can give them to me. This is called Lessons from Rocks and Rivers by Morgan Harper Nichols. If ever you start to feel rushed and stagnant at the same time, imagine a river. Imagine wild, rushed water passing over heavy rocks and boulders. This image of the river holds a paradox, the movement of the water and the stillness of the rocks. And yet there's room for both. Both the water and the rocks have their place. Remember this when life seems to move too quickly and too slowly all at once. When you feel you're being forced to rush ahead in some areas of your life and wait in other areas at the same time. When you feel stuck where you are while time continues on. For perhaps in some ways you are a river lined with rocks, capable of making room for movement and stillness in the very same body. Perhaps for some things you will have to wait longer than you want to, and at the same time a million exhales will rise up from within you, traveling outward and onward from your frame. You will still move forward in meaningful, honest ways. Each day is still a new day, and there is more than one course a river can take. Some rivers end in grand waterfalls while others bend into rivulets. Some rivers run through the woods and others through deserts and canyons. Wherever you find a river, a flow of running water, I hope you also look for stones holding their place. I hope you notice there is room for both movement and stillness, no matter where you are, no matter the landscape. Oh, how beautifully the rock-lined river makes room for both movement and stillness.
Thank you, Julie. Let's give a round of applause. That was fantastic. And I think there's one question coming in about the name of that poem, please.
The
Can
name
you
of the
repeat
poem.
it?
Yes, the poem is called Lessons from Rocks and Rivers by Morgan Harper Nichols. I'll put her name up here if you like.
Yeah, great. Yeah, put that
Morgan
name in.
Harper.
And while you're typing that in, if anyone's got any questions, please type them into the chat. And while people are thinking, if you're like me, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, there's so much information. It's always hard to articulate questions, but I do have one. And I was just wondering if you could talk about, like if a child really needs movement. So, they're outside and they seem to be running around but can't quite settle into anything. How do we support that child?
Yeah, I think that it's a interesting one because I recognize wholeheartedly the value of free play and not interfering in that. And I'm also very aware of children who have maybe a different neurotype or different sensory preferences that might find it difficult to organize their own body, especially when there isn't any of that seemingly containment around them. And I know that nature taps into the parasympathetic state, so it is naturally very soothing. But like I said, we're playing with this edge of sympathetic energy. So I think in some of those instances, there's a couple of things I might do. I might purposefully have activities that promote what I would call heavy work or movement against resistance, and nature's great for naturally having those around. Or another thing I might do is add an end product so that there's a kind of clear beginning and end to something. So say you were collecting wood for a hut. It's a good example of combining the two, actually. It's heavy work plus it's an end product. Like once you've collected enough sticks and logs, the hut can be complete and then we're finished, and then we can do something soothing together, like go inside and tell a story or whatever it might be. But yeah, thinking about how can I maybe make the beginning and the end of this a bit more predictable, and that might only be for a little while until that child is able to kind of sense that edge a bit easier, and then you can kind of bring those scaffolds out a little bit. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, fantastic. So we've got a couple of thank you, amazing,
Thanks.
Amazing. And we also have from Emily, also amazing, but she came in late and just wondering about the workshop. So the workshop is Julie, as part of the conference, has also recorded a workshop, and that's going to be available tomorrow. So we thought it was good to have this tonight as the live, and then you can watch the workshop tomorrow. So it will be going in deeper, which is really great. So keep an eye out for that, for those of you who are registered for the conference. For those of you who aren't registered for the conference, I'm sure this has been absolutely amazing as well. And then I'm just reading through, is there another? Oh, you spoke of Bruce Perry. Well, earlier in the piece, you also identified 2 other neuroscientists who influence your work. Can you recall these names?
Yes. So firstly, if you haven't read this book, that's backwards, isn't it?
No, that was perfect.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I highly recommend, just hiding my notes there. Highly recommend this book. It's very accessible to read. It's Bruce Perry's newest book, and it's kind of like him and Oprah are having a conversation, but there's so much
Oprah.
Yeah, I know. That's
Just drop that in there.
It's a pro or a con for some people. I don't know. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
The style of how it's written, and I found it was made Bruce Perry's information super accessible. The other people I talked about were Stephen Porges. I can type these out as well.
Stephen
Porges. Dr. Stephen Porges, I should say. So he developed polyvagal theory. And then Deb Dana, she's a therapist. I think she is a clinical social worker. And what she did was take polyvagal theory into the therapeutic world. So she, I kind of sat in this field of neuroscience, and then she made it much more accessible for therapists to implement in their work. Yeah, so I found some podcasts and whatnot where she's interviewed. The way she describes polyvagal theory again is really accessible, and I think her website's called Rhythms of Regulation, which has that little house analogy, if you want to find more info on that.
Cool. Right, any other questions? I don't think there's any other questions coming through. I'll just ask one other thing I was just writing down. You talked about glimmers, so those moments in time. And I was wondering if you were able to give us a bit of an example of a time that you had noticed a child experiencing a sense of ease, as you kind of worded it. Yeah.
So in my work, that's what I'm looking for all the time. So it's a practice, and it takes lots of practice. And I can say, even after all these years of practicing, it doesn't always look the same in every person. But I would notice generally what we touched on before was kind of a softening in the body. There's not that tension up in the shoulders and the jaw, and the child can kind of easily come into their midline. They might, if it's right for them, they might be more inclined to make eye contact or communicate that they want more by maybe using a body movement or something like that. But they are kind of able to meet you rather than moving around from one thing to the other. And I think just that sense of joy really as well, like noticing what is a moment of joy for a child is what I would kind of see as a glimmer. So a little giggle or a sparkle in their eye would tell me that there's a sense of ease in their nervous system. Yeah.
Fantastic. I just got one question here from Sarah. What are your thoughts on drinking water as a soothing mechanism?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that would, generally speaking, be helpful. Again, I'd want to notice what it does for a particular person in a particular scenario. I know that drinking through a straw can give that heavy work or resistance that I talked about before. So that can be soothing from that aspect. Or really cold water can also be a switch in the nervous system that might be quite helpful for some people. Do you have any more information around that? Like, have you noticed someone doing this, or you're wanting to offer that? Is that what you mean?
I'll give Sarah a couple of seconds to write in. If you're asking for someone or a specific situation, or you're noticing that, or just asking.
I think that's I have heard of it being like a first port of call in, I think it was a school somewhere in the country, but I can't remember where, but here in Aotearoa, that when a child got in trouble, the first thing they would do when they went to the principal's office was got offered a drink of water,
Cool.
which is really interesting. Yeah, I remember chatting to a friend about that, and I think, yeah, at its very basic physiological level, being dehydrated would make you dysregulated, but also I think it's a mouth tool, and you can get some of that resistive input through drinking, or just like a flick in the nervous system. Yeah.
Cool. I haven't seen anything come through, but I'll open up for any other last questions before we close for the evening. No. Hey, Julie, I really want to thank you for your conversation, your kōrero tonight. Like, I wear multiple different hats, as do most people here, I'm sure. We've got our professional hats and our parenting hats often. And I think for me, I often revert into my parenting in these kind of conversations. And that's really good, and my reflection is that for me, it's about noticing and being curious about my child, but also being really aware about myself and how regulated I am in situations as well, because I'm sure that has quite an impact. So, and that hand analogy was part of that, like I was kind of envisaging that as that this is my child, and if I wrap around them being calm and showing that they're safe, that they will feel more at ease. Whereas if I'm coming at them and trying to, be more reactive and confrontational, that's the feelings that they're having inside. So I think that was a really cool analogy that you gave us, and it was like I had feelings coming. It's
amazing, isn't it?
It is.
How did I have all these feelings only using my own two hands?
yeah totally. So thank you for myself on behalf of everyone. Sarah has come back, so we'll just finish up with this. And she said, I find that drinking water is personally such a soothing exercise. So a bit for personal, but also it changes the physical state. So observational for her. Great. And no more questions, so I think we will call it there. And thanks everyone for being so flexible as well and coming to us. Feel free to put some comments up in the Nature Educator Facebook page about your thoughts this evening, or if you have any questions thereafter. If you're like me, it's you reflect afterwards and you have your thoughts as we leave this conversation. So please come into the group, and Julie's in the group, so she'll be able to answer any questions if you have them. And enjoy her workshop tomorrow. Right, to finish, we're going to finish with one last karakia. So Julie, I will hand over to you for a karakia. Kia ora.
Te whakaaetanga e, te whakaaetanga e, tēnei te kaupapa ka ia. Tēnei te wānanga ka ia. Te mauri o te kaupapa ka whakamoia. Te mauri o te wānanga ka whakamoia. Koa ki runga, koa ki raro. Haumi e, hui e, taiki e.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And there's some lovely messages coming in the chat for you, Julie.
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah.
It's so nice.
Very soothing. I agree. I was thinking about that all the way through. I was like, gosh, I feel very calm listening to you, Julie.
Oh,
I ditto that. Relax.
That's so nice. Oh, have a great evening.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Ka kite, everyone.
Bye.